This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Tanse, hello, and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Oulette Stonechild, and I'm very excited and honored to have Jessica Barudin here with me today. She is a member of the Namgis First Nation, and I met Jessica a few years ago now in Montreal when I was facilitating a wellness workshop under her, and yoga is really what brought us together, and yoga is the foundation not only with my work, but also with Jessica's. Jessica is a proud mother of 2 daughters, a wife, a Sundancer, an Indigenous health researcher, a yoga teacher, and a doula. She has spent the last 10 years working professionally in Indigenous people's health and education, including a variety of roles in health research, health promotion, project management, and community engagement. Jessica has a master's of applied science in physical therapy from the McGill University and an undergraduate degree in human kinetics from the University of BC. Jessica currently works with the First Nations Health Authority as a traditional wellness specialist for Vancouver Island. So not only does she wear many hats, but she's actually created a cohort called First Nations Women's Yoga Initiative that combines Indigenous teachings with yoga philosophy. And so we share a lot of similarities in the way that we view the world and a lot of differences. And honestly, this entire episode is medicine to the ears. And so I really hope you enjoy it. We talk about her wellness journey, what she thinks of the wellness industry, and what is on the horizon for the next year. Hi. I'm very excited and honored to have Jessica here with me today. Thank you. Hi, Jessica, for sharing your time and your energy and your wisdom today. If you just want to introduce yourself to the audience, the traditional territory from where you're from, and a little bit about your work. Thank you so much.
Yo gelikas dochla, nugo amla tutlas, nugo anankwe, star woman, hetman ligami Jessica. Kwakiutl and Namgis Haxwamis Kwakiutl and Haxwamis. Shayla, I'm really happy to be here. My name is Jessica Barudin. I am Kwakwa, a member of the Namgis First Nation with ties to the ʼwakw through the Haxwamis and the Kwakiutl. And through my father's side, come from Russian background, Russian Jewish background. And I live in my home community in Alert Bay. That's northern Vancouver Island and Namgis territory. And currently working on a few different projects. I work full-time with the First Nations Health Authority as a traditional wellness specialist with the Vancouver Island region. And also working on my PhD, and it aligns with some of the work that I do in community, combining yoga and traditional practices for women and girls. And I'll talk more about that with the First Nations Women's Yoga Initiative. So, Gaelikasa, happy to be here.
Yeah, you do. I feel like there's so many parallels in our lives. We do a lot of similar things, obviously, probably in a lot of different ways. I feel like that was how I was introduced to your work, was through yoga and wellness and intertwining the two worlds. And so I know we're going to dive deeper into that conversation. But before we do, I'm curious to know, like, how has the past year been for you for 2021? I know it's been really different for everyone. And so how has the past year been?
Yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a huge learning experience, I would say. A lot of really positive things happening in my life, a lot of beautiful prayers coming to fruition. Just raising, I have 2 daughters, Maya and Leela. And so it's been just a busy time as they're growing and developing and just navigating this journey of motherhood during the pandemic. And overall, really a really powerful year of learning new lessons, lots of opportunities, and a lot of challenges for sure. Just being back home in my home community, I've been here for just over 2 years now. And so dealing with a lot of things that happen day to day and just cyclical things. There's been a lot of grief and loss for our nation and our neighboring nations, and a lot of crisis. So just kind of navigating as best I can with the tools that I have.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I feel the same. Like, I feel like there's so many cycles of grief right now. And I'm so thankful that, I went through yoga teacher training and I have some tools, but at the same time, I don't feel like any of us were really equipped for the reality that we're currently facing right now. There's still so much unknown. And I, hands down, have so much respect for anyone that's parenting during a pandemic right now, because I'm like, I can barely take care of myself some days, like let alone another like little human being. So my hands are up to you right now.
Well, they definitely help to ground me as well, and that routine and that sort of, well, that purpose. They give me a lot of strength and just joy. Like they're so much fun. My oldest daughter is 8 years old. She just had her birthday, and my youngest is 4. So it's just really special to be together and to be navigating through this whole pandemic. And it's been hard on them. Like they've been doing amazing. His children are so resilient. So yeah, but that joy has been present. So I'm great. I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I can imagine, because I like the last time I think we spoke, like actually physically in person, you were living in Montreal and then you're making the move to go back home. And so how has that transition been for you, going from like a busy, I'm actually in Montreal right now, going from like a busy, lively, city, to now living in your home territory or home turf? How has that transition been?
Well, that's funny because I do remember that and how we first met in person at McGill. I invited you over to that youth camp to teach yoga, because that was the same week that we were packing up our house, packing up our
Yeah.
trailer, and I was just over the top maxed out with stress. So I was so grateful that you were able to be there and show up for the youth that we had for the camp. But that was just ever since, we hit the road and we drove across from Montreal all the way to the island, is just been a whirlwind. It's definitely a huge transition. I moved home. And so the community here, just to give a bit of context, there's about 1,000 people maybe, at the most for the population, and about 50% Indigenous or First Nations from our nation, the Namgis, as well as other Kwakiutl nations. So it's been really grounding to come home. There's obviously been a lot of challenges, like for one, finding housing was a very unsettling time. So this past year or so, we just bought our first house. So that was just a major milestone for my husband and I, and just helped us to feel that foundation. That was, obviously, I think that's the scariest part, when you kind of uproot your life and you start a new job and you come home and all the family dynamics. But it's been incredible. And I had wanted to come home for many years prior to us actually making the move, for many reasons, mostly to be connected to my community and my family, and also to have opportunity to be immersed in our culture and learn our language. So that's been every day just what I continue to remind myself of, the important reasons for me being home. And yeah, I mean, challenges, but overall, I love it. It's a small community. It's a beautiful island surrounded by the ocean, surrounded by our, all of the animals and wildlife, and just feel a lot more grounded now, being out of the city. So it's been a change for sure.
How long were you in Montreal for? I'm curious.
I was there for 8 years. So I started
8
off
years.
doing
Okay.
I started off doing my master's there, and during that time, I had connected with my now current husband, and we had our first baby. And so we really started our family over there. That's where he's from. And so I was there for a lot longer than I anticipated. I kind of imagined myself just going to grad school, moving back to New York and starting a career or doing different things. And then, I became a mother, and that changed the trajectory of things, and home now. So it's been good.
Yeah, Vancouver, I feel like we have done a switcheroo, because I'm actually in the process of moving to Montreal, and I've been in Vancouver for the past 8 years. Yeah, but Vancouver provides, that's literally what I'm scared of too, because Vancouver provides you like connection to source. It provides you with answers. Like that you're not even like, you don't even really have to search for them there. It's all of a sudden they just like show up because you are connected to, you know, your community, connected to source, connected to your foundation, I feel. And so it is like a little intimidating moving again to like another city. But I think the similarities here are we're both following like our life purpose and our life path and what we've been set out to do now within this life. And I'm curious to know, like, we've talked a little bit already about like having foundations and having rituals and having routines. And so I'm curious to know, like, what does that actually look like for you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really interesting to see those sort of similarities in our own journeys. Montreal is a really great place for me to learn new things, to meet new people, and really it was a time of just figuring out what I wanted and also identifying what I was really missing. And it took me that many years to realize that I really needed to be home and I really need to immerse myself in culture and language because I didn't have access to that being, in Kanien'kehá:ka territory. But that being said, I learned so much from many elders over there. And my foundation, I'd say, started being in Tiohtià:ke and being over there and connecting with people from many different nations in sort of the Quebec area as well as in Ontario. And so that gave me a foundation and a ceremonial family and really a new lens of understanding what kinship is. So I'm really grateful for that time I spent there. And as far as now, things have changed a lot as far, being in Montreal and being in that area, connected to different elders and kind of ceremonial circles. I was able to, go on the sweat lot, start our Sundance commitment. And since we've moved, we haven't had those same ceremonies. So it's been a huge transition. And also in the last couple of years, our big house. So as I mentioned, we're ʼwakw and we potlatch. So that's a fundamental part of who we are as Kwakiutl people. And our big house has been pretty much closed for the almost 2 years until somewhat recently. And so we haven't had that same grounding to get into our sacred house and to do our dances. So it's been a lot of finding new ways of reconnecting. And so I've been, exploring a lot more in our traditional territory. And it's amazing to be able to get opportunities to go out on the water, to go out on the ocean and reconnect that way. And I think other tools that have really just helped me through the pandemic and just spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically is we're saltwater people. So the ocean provides so much healing and nourishment. So we do a lot of ocean cleanses and just trying to find those ceremonial pieces and communities, new circles here to just feel that connection to source and purpose.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the things that I'm gonna miss so much is like the water. And I'm a Pisces, so I feel like I naturally I gravitate towards water. And to know that the water is also like holds so much of our ceremonies. And when we speak of ceremony, ceremony looks so different, but also the intention, I think, remains the same. And it's like connecting to something greater than just yourself. And I know that's how I got introduced to yoga was for once in my life, I felt like I was connecting to source in another way. And so I'm curious to know, where did your yoga journey begin and why did you feel called to now teach yoga?
Yeah, yoga has been such a lifeline for me in so many ways. It's really helped me throughout my growth. I started yoga. I first started practicing yoga when I was in high school, just sort of exploring. We had a Bikram's yoga. I think the one in Cambie was the first sort of studio experience I ever had. So that was very different. For me, I was an athlete, so I thought this hot yoga thing was going to be very beneficial to me physically. And I just really enjoyed it. And after that, kind of just exploring a bit more with other studios over the years. And just really fell in love with the practice and starting to meet some different teachers. I did sort of the energy exchange thing at yoga, and just, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to afford it. I was a poor student, and those things, it wasn't accessible to me. But I had a lot of fun just learning and meeting new teachers and having new physical experiences in my own body, and exploring meditation. And it wasn't until I was in grad school that I was able to sort of save up enough to do my first teacher training. And I had always wanted to take it just because I knew it would be just about a month or more long of dedication for that first 200-hour training to really dive in and explore the practice and to learn more about the history of yoga, the roots of yoga, and all the other different facets. It's such a rich practice. So I love learning that first foundational piece, and just continued on over the years, taking more trainings, learning new skill sets, and it really related with what I was studying in school. I always studied science from a Western lens, but focused on the body, so human kinetics and rehabilitation. So physical therapy was my background. So I always imagined that it would complement what I was learning about the body. But then that's when I started to really realize there's so many gaps in what I understood from the Western lens. And that's when I really knew there's so much more to the subtle body energetically. And then at that time, there was a lot of chaotic things, tragic things that happened while we were in Montreal, including the loss of my mother-in-law. So that whole experience of grief really shook us, and it brought us down a spiritual path and into a deeper connection to spiritual communities. And that's when I really felt that my whole background in sort of understanding science and the body was just incomplete. So diving deeper into yoga helped me to understand more about the different layers of our whole existence as, who we are as human beings and consciousness. And I still have a lot to learn. I feel like the more that I dive into understanding and learning more about yoga, I feel like I don't really know that much. So one of those things. But
yeah, no, I feel the same way. That's I think when you're taking all those trainings, like 200 hours is not enough. I feel, to even become a teacher. So I kind of went on the same journey of I don't know enough information. And I think what I love about yoga too is, the history that happened in India of it essentially being colonized by the British, and then they had to take the yoga practice underground. And when you think of the potlatch ban out here in Canada and how we had to take our ceremonies underground, it's kind of wow, we are always kind of bringing our ceremonies and our practices to save them from colonial forces almost. And so I have a deep respect for the history, but also the philosophies and the worldviews. And I'm the same way. I feel like I'm gonna forever be a student. And so I know you've gone through several trainings, and likewise. And I want to know more about your experience being probably, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume you're the only Indigenous person within these trainings. And so I'm curious to know what are your thoughts about the wellness industry, and what do you think needs to happen or change within the wellness industry itself?
Yeah, definitely in my first training. So that would have been 2012. I remember asking the studio if they had any sort of supports or scholarships for First Nation students or whatever. And I remember the response was just short of laughter. So there's been a huge change even since I started my first training, because now a lot of studios are offering, BIPOC scholarships, which I think is really great and needed across the board, probably more than what is being provided. But I think that overall, yeah, it's been a huge shift. I think there's my experiences have definitely been, I've been one of the only sort of brown girls in the studio, and then I don't think I've been into a yoga studio class since I saw you in Kits, I don't know when that was. So it's been a while. I don't really gravitate towards that big box yoga anymore. and just trying to find my own way, my own style, and ways of integrating and connecting to the practice of yoga. Because like you said, it's really incredible, the similarities, not only in the shared colonial history, of Turtle Island and of the colonization in India that happened to Indian people, by way of, the British, and just all of that. We had a really enriching first session in our cohort, the First Nations Women's Yoga Initiative, where we heard about that from Emmy Chahal, who's a yoga instructor and just a lovely person. She really got into the depths of how much it's really impacted her as a descendant from someone from northern India, and the historical pieces, and how they outlawed temple dancing and yoga and all the spiritual practice, the same way that the spiritual practices were targeted here, and the language. So there was a lot of similar shared grief and loss, and it was profound for the women in our group, and for myself to understand a little bit more. But even when you trace back pre-colonization, there's so many similarities with yoga and our own culture, Kwakiutl, but other First Nations people, all Indigenous people, of how the songs came, how the chants and mantras came, and how the practices. So it's really fascinating to me to connect that our people have the richness and philosophies and science.
Well, that's the thing too, because when I took my trainings, I was actually kind of overwhelmed, because I was like, okay, here's the Nehiao teachings, and then I'm learning, about Tantra now, and then I'm learning about like Hatha Vinyasa, and I was just learning so many things that I was like overwhelming my nervous system, and so I actually went into a sweat. And the medicine man like told me, he's like, Shayla, I know you're learning so much right now, and you're learning different ways of life, but we may call them different things, but it all connects us to the same source. And so when he said that, it kind of just like interconnected all those things for me. And I was like, wow, this is actually like, yeah, these are deep, deep practices that our ancestors have known for like so long. And it's so cool now to see like almost an integration of these two world views. And so I'm curious to know, like, how has it been with your cohort, the First Nations Women's Yoga Initiative? What does that cohort look like, and how has it been integrating those two worlds?
Well, the cohort has been just incredible. So it's, as I mentioned, I'm currently working towards my PhD. I'm just in my third year now, and finished my coursework. And part of my research process was to look at this cohort as an opportunity to develop, co-create a curriculum for First Nations women, specifically with a context of the North Island. And that was really eye-opening, just the experience. So we had our first cohort that started last February. So it ran through the winter, and it was 80 hours was what we outlined for 8 modules. And it was just incredible. And right now I'm just rewatching the virtual classrooms. We had, it was all through Zoom. We weren't able to meet in person. So that was challenging. But I think at the same time, it brought so many different women and Two-Spirit people together during such a difficult time. So now I'm looking through, going through the analysis piece of some of the post-cohort interviews that I had with some of the participants. And so we had 20 women join us, and out of those 20, 12 had officially completed the program. And we've just been, our whole mission for creating this has really been to remove some of those barriers that we see in some of the mainstream yoga and wellness industry. And so we are working on a scaffolding approach so that the women, they don't just take a training and then that's it, they're done. We're really nurturing their pathways for those who do want to continue on for more training. So now that 5 will be moving forward into their 200-hour training. So we're really excited about that. But it's incredible, honestly. The whole last winter, we were meeting on Friday nights and Sunday mornings, biweekly, and doing live classes over Zoom. And it was a lifeline for me and for many of them. I think every single person that was part of the training had a very significant event happen in their life, mostly traumatic, and they were already working through a lot of trauma. So it became a healing container for all of us, kind of going along this journey, diving deep. And a lot of the women knew each other. So even just healing and reconciling some of those relationships and coming together and working together. And we had an elder with us, Kwakwa Vera Newman. So she's one of our fluent speakers. And so she was present at every one of our classes, and that really grounded us just through prayer, through hearing the language, through hearing her share very vulnerably about her life and learnings. And we had amazing guest speakers, other elder women and other yoga teachers and different experts. We had different knowledge keepers come in and share with us. So just incredibly enriching and powerful. We did from the start, like, this isn't a place for trauma processing, like just being mindful of what you bring and what you share in the classes, because we're all here and working through things like it. But at the end of the day, it was a place where we could all be vulnerable. We could share our stories and really dive deep into some of those emotional layers and historical pieces.
Yeah, no, I think that like all of that is such medicine, not only like being in kinship and in community and connection with other women and two-spirited relatives, but also just like letting your guard down, like letting these like, I don't know, these walls that we put up within society and just like allowing us to like breathe and really root into our nervous system and to be witnessing other people doing the same. And so I'm curious to know, like, why do you think it's so important that we begin to do this work? Yeah, I'll leave it at that because that's a pretty big question.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to go back because I know you asked a bit about what have you learned about the yogic side of things, and then bringing First Nations women into the circle. And what I found so far is that there's such a strong desire for ourselves as First Nation women to maintain our own cultural integrity. So when we were learning from some of our guest speakers who were Southeast Asian themselves and talking about, their lived experience through their family and through their teachings, there was a strong desire to be very grounded in not taking what wasn't ours, and really understanding that this is a distinct system of healing, of practice and wellness that comes from a specific place, a specific geography with a lot of history and people. So there was an interesting contrast there where people were, the women in the cohort were a little bit reluctant almost to pick up some of the practices, for instance, like chanting in Sanskrit, because they didn't want to appropriate, they didn't want to take something in a sensitive way. But overall, I think, what the foundation of the training, because it's not a full yoga teacher training, we really wanted it to be a place for the participants to understand trauma a bit more. So it's a trauma-informed, culturally rooted curriculum. And, there's so much to say about trauma and trauma research and sort of how that's evolved over the past, decade or even the last few decades. It's really become a bit of a buzzword, but our people really have a deep and entrenched lived experience of trauma and that ongoing cumulative trauma. And so very just challenging at times to unpack and talk a bit about different ways of knowing. And what I love to share with people whenever talking about trauma is that it doesn't just live in a vacuum. It's on a continuum. So we can't talk about trauma without bringing in healing and also introducing that it's a whole continuum of care. And that's what was all about, is for women to really ground themselves, understand different aspects that we can, theoretically about trauma, maybe scientifically from a Western lens, as well as bringing in yogic perspectives to that, and then rooting it in what we know as Indigenous people, what we know as Kwakwa people, and tying that to our language and bringing in language learning into the process. So that has always been, for me, one of the major traumas that our people have endured, the loss of language. And so that's everything that we bring is to reconnect. And that work is just so incredibly important for our sense of identity, our sense of understanding our paradigm, and just knowing more about who we are and where we come from. So that, that is interesting. I mean, when I tell people, sometimes I kind of like laugh when I tell people a bit about what my research is, because to someone who doesn't practice yoga or doesn't know much about First Nations people, it might be hard to see where the parallels are, but it's really apparent through the process of this cohort that we just had. And I'm just excited.
Yeah, the ability to hold like so many truths at the same time too, because like you just mentioned, like a lot of things, that's how I felt. That's honestly why I wasn't a teacher for a while. It's because I felt like in a way it was like cultural appropriation. And I was scared to, do the same thing, take from this lineage that I did not come from. And so I think, when we even mention cultural appropriation within the wellness industry, people just like shut down real quick, or they just don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious to know, like, how do you honor yoga's roots and lineage while you're teaching or through your practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's an ongoing question that I have to come back to and just always remind myself where yoga comes from and that it isn't from my people, and keeping that in mind just to maintain that integrity that we can't take what's not ours. And it really is just trying to switch a bit that paradigm to look towards, well, how can we give back? And that was actually something that was a strong thing that we hear from the women. Especially with the crisis that was happening in India last year. A lot of women in our cohort wanted to mobilize and raise funds and send it to India. And I was just thinking like, wow, like that's incredible considering how much, we have going on in our own communities. There's a lot of poverty, and just seeing how the desire was to always give back. So I think it's just about being in right relation and always coming back to being grounded in who you are as a person, as or other people practicing from different backgrounds, just being really rooted in who you are and always paying homage and respect to the people where this beautiful practice comes from, as well as the ancestors who maintain integrity. Western yoga has changed a lot and it continues to evolve. But I think just really, it's a good reminder. It's a good moving practice and meditation to always come back to standing in our truth and doing, or at least reconnecting to our own practices. So that's what's really helped me with practicing yoga, is being able to work towards being in alignment and in balance so that I can be a good relative, that I could be a good ancestor, a good mother, and be there as best I can.
Yeah. And really that's like coming back to our teachings. I know you mentioned like creating like a reciprocal relationship. And so I love that you brought up like even just donating or giving to that lineage in some kind of way. And it reminds me of like, our offerings and offering tobacco, and just always this give and this pull and this take. And it's like creating a reciprocal relationship. And I also love that you brought up language. And for me, a big learning aspect of my yoga journey was, how can I learn Sanskrit when I don't even know Nehya, when I don't even know my own language? And so I love that you're bringing, language almost as the container for these two lineages. And so how do you intertwine language within the cohort and within yoga itself?
Yeah. And that's interesting because when I think back to even some of the yoga trainings that I've had and some of the guidance that I received early on was just like, when you're teaching beginners, don't bring in Sanskrit. Don't make it too much about yoga. And I just it never sat right with me. So I'm always trying to introduce yogic concepts and Sanskrit as best as I can pronounce and grasp myself to share when I do teach, and try to really maintain the integrity of how I've been taught or how I have understood and embodied different practices within meditation and pranayama and asana and those different, it's such a rich practice. So when it comes to bringing in our language, it was such a no-brainer because, we're working on our nervous system when we're practicing yoga and when we're coming together and learning how to ground ourselves, even working through trauma and intergenerational trauma and all the things that we know as, living beings in this sort of existing colonial time. And when we're in that place, it's sometimes hard to learn language. For me, I'm still a baby speaker. I'm still just very early onto my language learning journey, and it takes a lot of dedication. And the first part that I realized for me as just moving forward with it was coming to a place of acceptance of not knowing and feeling okay with knowing that it's not my fault that I don't know my language. It's not my fault that I didn't grow up hearing it. And it's not my mother's fault. It's not, it's not on my direct line. It's really coming back to all of the colonial practices and harms that were set out to systematically remove that from us. So I approach it now as it's a birthright, and it's something that we have to reclaim because in the next 100 years, they say that linguists say that 80% of languages will be non-existent. So it becomes critical in my work, in my parenting, to come back to language learning alongside my children, alongside, the women that I'm working with. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because you can't always get the pronunciation right, or maybe you're not learning as quickly as you hope. There's a lot of things. It's not like you're just learning Portuguese or you're learning Spanish or French or anything. There's a whole emotional layer of things to work through. So I notice that I think I've come some way that I'm not so entrenched in some of that grief cycle of not knowing my language, and just working towards that dedication and weaving the two. I don't shy away with our cohort. When we talk about asana, we always bring in the Sanskrit piece and encourage them to know what it is. And then we've been exploring, there's been several different language speakers who've already done a lot of translation of the poses. So there's a continual, it's kind of a playfulness of learning and kind of applying that in yoga class, and then bringing in some of our sacred songs or chants into the practice. And it's an incredible framework, I find, for language learning. And that's really going to be the focus of our second cohort, to bring in more language speakers, bring in more resources and practice time for us to explore the roots of yoga and working through, what a yoga class might look like, but also making space for integrating language, integrating our spiritual practices and reclaiming those. So I love it. It's so much fun.
Yeah, there's so much medicine in that. And I feel like, language provides you the blueprint to understanding your own history and your ancestors and the worldview. And I also at times feel like a rush of these colonial timelines, and I get kind of antsy because I'm not learning as fast as I should. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe I just need to decolonize my own perception of time and be easier and more gentle on myself. And so there's this idea of decolonization. And I feel like the wellness world is now, catching up to this aspect of, decolonization, decolonizing the wellness world. And so I'm curious to know, in your own words, how would you define decolonization? And is it possible to do that within the wellness industry?
Well, I guess my life has changed a lot since leaving an urban area like Montreal, and being in my home community. Like I said, there's no huge corporate influence here. It's very, mom and pop. There's only a couple of restaurants. There's not, a big economy. And so we don't have those same experiences here on a day-to-day basis of the wellness industry. So it's not fully in my sphere. So I don't think about it as much, but, on social media and being still, having so much lived experience in urban areas and what those wellness spaces are like, I don't find they are progressing maybe enough fully to embrace all the diversity that there is, not only in Indigenous cultures and ways of knowing, but other people that are historically and continuously excluded from those spaces and from the industries. So for me, really, that decolonization piece comes back to doing our work that we're already doing, of just reclaiming our practices, our own wellness systems, because those existed for, thousands of years since time immemorial. We had our own ways of being in balance, living in harmony. And so that's my version of decolonization. And there's so much more to say, just as different ways that I've tried to frame it and understand it, I guess, from more of a intellectual side of things. There's one scholar who is Kwakwa. Her name's Marianne Nicholson, and she wrote her thesis about our language. And so in that, she found the similarities of how the language is written and the connections between body, house, and land. So throughout her paper, it says body equals house equals land. And that has given me a lot of inspiration of how I look at decolonization, or just getting back to who we are and how to, come back from all this pain, this trauma, a lot of this grief and loss is really reclaiming and strengthening our body, our house, and our land. So there's a lot of healing that has to happen on the physical layer, as well as, socially in our homes. And that, represents a bit from a Kwakiutl lens, more of a societal sense. And then the land, of course, rematriating the land and getting back to being in our territory, being connected, knowing our waterways, knowing our territory cycles. And so it's a whole process. And just like you said, I think it's a lifelong thing, like language learning, like practicing yoga, like anything. It's just coming back home to that.
Well, it's coming. I love that it's like it provides that interconnection of just returning back to the land and returning back to your territory. I love that you mentioned, the body, the home, and the land. And I'm definitely going to use that moving forward. And speaking of moving forward, for anyone that's wanting to join your cohort, what are the requirements to joining the cohort, and what would your advice be for, the younger generation that's maybe just beginning their yoga wellness journey?
Yeah, so moving forward, we're really excited. We're just about to announce our second cohort starting in the winter 2022. And so it'll be, we're still just refining a few things, and the application process will open, I think, in December. I don't have dates right now, but otherwise, just to share about like some of the requirements, we're still moving forward with the second cohort to be very situated in Kwakiutl epistemology. But that being said, it is open to First Nations people who identify as women and Two-Spirit. So we're trying to get away from, the binary, but also trying to maintain a safe space for women, because there's so much strength of just being together and building up that collective. And so, we'll get rolling with that in the winter, and the applications will come out. We had, an overwhelming amount of applications for our first cohort. It was a bit surprising, but we do have a bit of kind of criteria, so to speak, of looking at the applicants. And then for those who don't actually join us for the cohort, we are working on just public offerings, so live classes, other ways to connect. And I continue to teach online, to teach in community, and try to bring practices to folks who may have never practiced before. Like a lot of the work that I'm doing in community is with our folks in treatment, so healing from substance use or misuse, and it's been really incredible just to help on that journey of sharing just what little I know about yoga and even my own culture to people who are on their healing journey. So I think just ongoing, we're creating some resources, some practice videos so people can learn alongside the cohort. And as we continue to scale up, since it's still such an emerging initiative, there's a lot of work to do, and just amplifying the people who are doing the work like yourself. There's lots of amazing Indigenous yoga teachers out there, a lot more than since I started my first training. Exciting to see people take an interest and to really connect to their bodies and to learn about these different practices and integrate that with breath work and then bringing that to ceremony and just everyday life.
Yeah, I'm like, can I join the cohort, or do you have to be a student?
You should come teach for sure.
Yeah. I feel like it's everything that I need. And especially during this time too, like virtually, it is like a different type of medicine, connecting with other Indigenous and two-spirited people. And I guess, how can people support your work moving forward?
I think just connecting. I always love connecting with new people. So on social media or other ways. I love collaborating with different people and organizations and initiatives. So that's always something that I'm interested in connecting with folks about. If people have the means to support by a monetary donation, I'm partnered with the Yoga Outreach Society, and so they accept. They are a charity, so they accept donations, and that can go directly towards the First Nations Women's Yoga Initiative. So those are a few ways that I can think of, but overall, I feel pretty good about where I am and just the beautiful circle of support we have and just how things are growing from the first cohort onwards and creating really beautiful ripple effects. So even from that, there's been an initiative led by one of our graduates. Her name's Avis O'Brien, and she's leading a suicide prevention workshop that's really has a lot of similarities to our cohort and offering body-based practices and embodied ways to heal. And so I can share the link to that. So if there's anyone who wants to check out that work and really give back, I think, towards our youth, that's what that initiative has created. So I could just see a lot of positive things happening or contributing to language revitalization and supporting their own communities or communities who are continuing to learn and reclaim language.
And I know we're wrapping up here pretty quick, but I know I asked this a little bit earlier, but I know there's quite a bit of youth that listen to this, and I know there's probably some here that have never practiced yoga or any kind of breath work. And so what would your advice be to the younger generation that wants to, introduce yoga to their life or introduce wellness practices? What would your advice be for the younger generation?
I think that if they have people they trust in their communities already and that there's ceremonies there, that can be a really good starting place to learn about being in your body. And I think that if they are able to connect with those practices, that's really, for me, the goal as an Indigenous person. But just trying it out, I don't think I've ever met anyone who's felt worse or bad after leaving a yoga practice or a meditation. So just being open-minded, I think that our young people are so amazing at just trying new things and just being fearless in that sense of being open to exploring new connections and really building a connection with self. So yeah, I hope helps.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for building this connection with me and for reconnecting. It's been a minute since we've reconnected, and I'm super inspired by all the work that you're putting out in the world while also juggling being a mother, and everything that you're doing is it's amazing. And I look forward to continuing to see your journey online and hopefully in person soon. Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing your wisdom and your expertise. Hi for being here.
Kila Kasla.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback.
Follow me on Instagram at ShaylaJOH, at matriarch.movement. And don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much for listening to a podcast by The Brand is Female. I'm Ava Hertling, and this episode was produced by our team. Sound engineering by Isabel Morris. Research and production support, Claire Miglionico. Marketing and digital growth, Kayla Gillis. And partnerships, Natalie Hope.